What would you do if the man you mocked in front of everyone handed you divorce papers without a word? That envelope landed on my counter like a verdict, filled with every receipt of my mistakes. And all of it started with one so-called joke about his best friend. My name is Celine Harrow. I'm 34, and I had been married to Daniel Cross for 7 years. We built what looked like a normal life from the outside. 2 kids, a steady home in the suburbs, a husband with a good engineering job, and me holding down an office role that paid the bills but never fed my ego. People saw us as dependable, ordinary, safe. That was the problem. I never wanted ordinary. Daniel was loyal to the point of boredom, steady to the point of invisibility, and everyone thought I should be grateful. I told myself I deserved more, that wanting attention and validation was not wrong, even if I had to look for it elsewhere. That was where Victor Lang came in, Daniel's best friend since high school. Victor had this easy charm, a way of looking at me that reminded me I was still interesting, still desirable, still more than just someone's mother and someone's wife. At first it was harmless, or so I told myself. A laugh here, a comment there, leaning too close at his bar when I stopped by after work. I convinced myself it was nothing serious, that I had it under control, that Daniel was too secure to notice or care. But the truth was, I liked seeing Daniel squirm when I teased Victor. I liked watching him shift uncomfortably, and I told myself he was too sensitive, too uptight, that I was only joking. My sister Alara encouraged me, saying a woman should never apologize for keeping her spark alive. She thought Daniel was dull, and I agreed more than I admitted. Even my friends would laugh when I made sarcastic remarks at Daniel's expense, and I fed off that laughter, believing it proved I was clever and untouchable. Daniel's mother, Margaret, saw through me, though. She always looked at me as if she knew I was stirring trouble. But she never said much, only watched with those sharp eyes. I brushed it off because I thought Daniel would never actually do anything, that he was too steady, too patient, too forgiving to fight back. I thought I was safe in the role I created, the witty wife with the quiet husband. I didn't realize until it was too late that I had been digging my own grave with every careless joke, every late night, every glance at Victor that lingered too long. The night everything shifted started at home, and like most disasters, it came from something I brushed off as harmless. Dinner had been finished, the kids were playing in the living room, and I was leaning against the counter scrolling my phone when Victor's name came up in a group chat. I made a little comment loud enough for everyone to hear about how even Victor had once tried me, laughing as if it was some silly story, not realizing Daniel was standing in the doorway listening. In my head, it was a joke, a way to feel a spark, a way to remind everyone that I still drew attention from men, even his closest friend. I didn't think it mattered, not really. I had convinced myself that Daniel never reacted anyway, that he always swallowed his feelings and let me play around with words. The look on his face that night was not anger, not even surprise, but something quieter, heavier, like he had just made up his mind about something. He didn't say a word, and that silence gave me even more confidence to carry on, as if I hadn't just crossed a line. I told myself he was being dramatic, that he should know by now I only teased. To me it was entertainment, to him it was betrayal, though I refused to admit it. It didn't stop there because I liked the attention my little barbs brought. At a dinner with friends a week later, I repeated the joke. I framed it like Victor and I were just so close that even Daniel's best friend couldn't resist me, and the table erupted in nervous laughter. Some of the women smirked, some of the men shifted uncomfortably, but I felt in control. I told myself I was showing I still had power, that I was proving I wasn't invisible. Daniel barely touched his food that night, barely spoke, and when he excused himself early, I painted him as the uptight one, the man who couldn't take a little fun. I leaned into the role, smiling, telling the others he always got this way when he was tired. Inside, I noticed how Victor kept avoiding my eyes, how his face tightened when I mentioned him, but I ignored that too. I thought I was keeping the upper hand. At home, Daniel grew quieter, his patience no longer comforting but cold. He didn't confront me, and I took that as a sign that he was folding again, as always. I told myself I had won, that my jokes were harmless, that he would get over it like every other time. Alara encouraged me, saying men always need to be reminded that their wives are still desirable, that if Daniel couldn't handle it, that was his weakness. Margaret's silence grew sharper, and when she took the children for a weekend, I told myself she was only being helpful, not realizing she was protecting them from the storm already gathering. I should have known Daniel wasn't sulking. I should have noticed when his laptop disappeared from the table, when certain files were no longer in the cabinet, when his phone stayed locked and hidden. I thought I was still in control, but really, he had already begun preparing his move, and I was too wrapped up in my own games to see it. When the distance between us grew, I convinced myself it was nothing more than another one of his sulks, the kind he always slipped into before eventually forgiving me. I carried on with my routines, telling anyone who would listen that Daniel was too sensitive, that he always blew my harmless comments out of proportion. At work, I painted myself as the frustrated wife trapped with a man who didn't understand me. My coworkers nodded along, and I felt validated, as if their agreement proved my actions weren't wrong. I told myself every marriage had jokes, every wife poked at her husband, and I was simply braver than most for saying aloud what others only thought. In truth, the more Daniel pulled away, the more I leaned into Victor. I stopped at his bar after work, pretending it was just a convenient place for a drink. But really, I wanted the way he looked at me when no one else was watching. He had once flirted back easily, but now he grew cautious, checking over his shoulder as if expecting Daniel to walk in. When I teased him about being nervous, he brushed me off, and I twisted that in my head into proof that he wanted me but was afraid. I carried those little scraps of attention home and used them to fuel more sarcasm toward Daniel, more jokes about how lucky he was to have me. Alara kept feeding me encouragement, telling me I deserved to feel alive, telling me Daniel should be grateful someone like me even stayed. She said a man like him would never leave because men like him valued stability over pride. I believed her. I wanted to believe that his silence meant I had him trapped, that he would never risk breaking the family apart. Margaret, on the other hand, became more direct in her coldness. She offered to take Jonah and Cora on little outings more often, said they needed fresh air, said it was important for them to spend time with their grandparents. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just overstepping as usual, but a small part of me noticed how Daniel never disagreed with her. He let her take them without a fight, and I pushed away the nagging thought that maybe he was letting her shield them from me. Then one evening I walked into the study and saw the desk drawers half empty. Papers that had always been there were gone, his laptop missing from its usual place. I asked him casually later why he had moved things, but he only shrugged and went back to checking his phone. I told myself he was reorganizing, that he was too dull to ever act decisively. Still, I felt a chill settle in the house, as if something irreversible had already been set in motion. I ignored it, distracting myself with Victor, with Alara, with anything that kept me from admitting what my gut already knew. Daniel was not sulking. He was planning, and for the first time, the game I thought I controlled was no longer mine to play. The real turning point came when I convinced myself I could still smooth everything over if I just controlled the story. I started telling anyone who questioned me that I was stressed from work and family, that sometimes I said silly things when I was overwhelmed. I claimed Daniel misunderstood me, that I never meant my comments the way they sounded. I wrapped myself in excuses, convincing myself they were truths. When Daniel grew more distant, I played the victim, saying to my sister that he was cold and unresponsive, that he didn't understand how hard it was to keep everything together. Alara, of course, fed my side, reminding me that men always overreact when they feel their pride is threatened. She said I should not back down, that admitting guilt would only make him think he had control. So I stayed firm, even when I could see in his eyes that he was no longer hurt but detached. There was a difference in him that unsettled me, but I refused to name it. The children sensed it before I did. Jonah stopped asking Daniel to help with his homework and instead went straight to Margaret. Cora clung to her grandmother's hand more than mine when we all gathered on Sundays. I tried to brush it off as them just wanting attention, but I saw the way Margaret's eyes lingered on me, sharp and knowing. She didn't argue, didn't confront, but she watched me as though she was waiting for me to unravel. I convinced myself she was the problem, not me, that she was planting doubts in Daniel's head. I told Daniel this once, saying his mother was too involved, but he only gave me a blank look and walked out of the room. That silence was worse than any argument, but still I carried on pretending it meant nothing. Then came the night everything changed. I was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine, when the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a neighbor, maybe someone selling something, but instead, a man in a suit stood there and asked my name. I nodded, and he handed me an envelope thick and formal. He said nothing more, just turned and left. When I opened it, my heart lurched. Divorce petition, custody notes, my name written in stark black ink, as if I were the villain in a story I thought I controlled. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking, and saw dates, times, references to messages I thought had been hidden. It was all there, every reckless text to Victor, every unexplained late night, even mentions of witnesses who had seen us together. Daniel hadn't been ignoring me. He had been documenting me. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized the missing laptop and empty drawers had been evidence gathering, not sulking. He hadn't been retreating. He had been preparing. I wanted to scream, to call Alara, to run to Victor for comfort, but none of them could fix what was laid out in front of me, in legal language I could barely understand. I told myself it was just a tactic, that Daniel was trying to scare me into behaving, but deep down I knew it was final. He had taken the step I never thought he was capable of. I sat at the table staring at the papers, trying to summon anger, trying to tell myself he was cruel and vindictive, but all I could feel was the hollow echo of my own laughter from every time I had made him the butt of my jokes. I had turned him into a ghost in his own home, and now he had chosen to become one in my life entirely, leaving behind nothing but his signature and the undeniable truth that I had pushed him too far. The following weeks blurred together, but I remember the cold weight of the law office most clearly. Sitting across from Daniel, separated by polished wood and stiff chairs, I tried to read his face, searching for any trace of the man who once smiled at me over morning coffee. But he wasn't there. Instead, there was a man who spoke little and let his lawyer handle everything. Every time I tried to address him, to soften my voice and say I was sorry for the stress, or that I only made careless jokes, he kept his eyes on the documents, never on me. His lawyer laid out spreadsheets of finances, timelines of my so-called outings, even screenshots from messages I thought I had deleted. They had witnesses too, people who had seen me meeting Victor more than once. Each page they slid across the table felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I could still control. I tried to argue that Daniel was abandoning his family, that he was tearing our children away from me, but he stayed calm, his lawyer pointing to careful custody notes that showed he wanted stability, that he had thought of their schooling, their routines, their safety. The word safety burned, as if I were the danger. I told myself he was exaggerating, but the evidence stacked too neatly for me to dismiss. When I left the office that day, I told Alara that Daniel was being heartless, that he had turned into a stranger. She said he was trying to scare me, that he would never follow through, but even she sounded less certain than before. The confidence in her voice had cracked, and I felt it. Margaret didn't hide her feelings anymore. When I tried to tell her that Daniel was being unfair, that he was freezing me out, she answered simply that Daniel was protecting his children. She called them his children, not ours, and it cut deeper than I expected. At family gatherings, friends no longer laughed at my remarks. They avoided my eyes, conversations turning stiff when I entered the room. The people who once applauded my jokes now looked away, and I hated the silence more than the laughter I used to crave. I knew word had spread, that the story was no longer mine to control. Victor stopped answering my texts. When I showed up at his bar, he avoided me, slipping into the back as if I were poison. I told myself he was a coward, that he didn't want to be dragged into drama, but really it confirmed what I feared. I was alone. All the people I thought would stand with me were stepping back, leaving me exposed while Daniel moved quietly, methodically, with the law on his side. When the custody motion arrived, detailing that Jonah and Cora would live primarily with Daniel, I tried one last time to manipulate the story. I cried in front of friends, telling them Daniel was punishing me for being playful, that he was ripping a family apart out of pride, but no one rushed to defend me. The room stayed quiet, and I realized how quickly sympathy drains when evidence is stacked against you. The night before the first hearing, I sat at the kitchen table again. The same place. I had once laughed too loudly about Victor. The house was silent, the children asleep at Margaret's, Daniel staying elsewhere. I stared at the empty glass in front of me and thought about how certain I had been that Daniel would never leave, that he would always bend, that his quietness was weakness. Now I saw it differently. His quiet had been calculation. His silence had been preparation. I had mistaken patience for surrender, and that mistake had cost me everything. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not because of the temperature, but because of how final every word sounded once it was read into the record. I sat at the long table beside my lawyer, trying to keep my hands from shaking, while Daniel sat across from me, calm and composed. He didn't even glance my way, not once. He kept his focus on the judge, on the papers, on the path he had chosen. I told myself I could still sway things, that if I showed the right emotions, people would believe I was misunderstood. So I let tears roll down my face, explained that my jokes were never serious, that I had been under pressure, that I still wanted our family together. I painted Daniel as harsh, as unforgiving, as a man letting pride destroy what we had built. But my words fell flat against the evidence his side presented. Every late night, every message to Victor, every small lie I had told stacked into a mountain too large to climb. The judge's eyes stayed steady on me, not cruel but unyielding, and I realized then that no amount of tears or excuses could erase the trail I had left behind. Daniel's lawyer spoke of stability, of routine, of the best interest of Jonah and Cora. They spoke of how Daniel had prepared detailed schedules for school, health, and extracurriculars, how he had already arranged his work commitments to be available for them. It wasn't about revenge, at least not on paper. It was about structure, about protection, about giving them a life without conflict. I wanted to argue that I had been the primary caregiver, that they needed their mother. But even as I said it, I saw the contradiction. How many nights had I chosen Victor's bar over bedtime stories? How many weekends had Margaret stepped in when I claimed to be too tired? All of it was documented, all of it undeniable. The final blow came when custody was awarded in Daniel's favor for weekdays, leaving me with weekends and certain holidays. I felt the ground slip under me. The financial orders followed, clean and sharp, cutting away the security I once took for granted. The house, the savings, even the details of how bills would be managed, everything was decided with Daniel's steady hand guiding it. I wanted to shout that he was ruining me, but the truth sat heavy. I had ruined myself long before he ever walked into that courtroom. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like a door slamming shut. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and Daniel stood without hesitation. He walked out with the same quiet resolve he had carried for months, and I realized there was nothing left to say. My last glimpse of him was his back as he left the room, shoulders squared, not once looking back at me. I sat there, pen still in my hand, staring at my own signature on the custody and financial orders. The ink was barely dry, yet it felt like it had already etched itself into stone. My lawyer gathered the papers, murmuring something about next steps, but I barely heard. All I could focus on was the silence Daniel left behind, colder than any words could have been. That silence was my punishment, sharper than laughter, sharper than anger. It was the final reminder that my jokes, my games, my belief that I held all the power had brought me here, to an empty table in a courtroom, watching the man I once thought would never leave walk away without hesitation, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my own choices. When I returned to the house that final evening, it no longer felt like mine. The walls were the same, the furniture in its place, but the air had changed. Margaret had taken Jonah and Cora to Daniel's new place for the week, as the court ordered, and the silence left behind was suffocating. I walked from room to room, telling myself they would come back for weekends, that I still had a role, that I was still their mother, but the echo of my footsteps made it clear the rhythm of this home had shifted away from me. The kitchen, once noisy with clattering plates and Daniel's quiet presence, now sat spotless and still. I sat at the table where I had once laughed too loud at my own cruel jokes, where I had tossed out the line about Victor trying me, and all I could hear was the hollow sound of my own voice replaying in my head. I tried to reach for the comfort I once found in Alara, but even she had grown distant. She told me quietly over the phone that maybe I had gone too far, that Daniel had only done what any man with pride and children to protect would do. For the first time, she did not rush to tell me I was right. That silence from her, heavy with disappointment, cut deeper than her usual encouragement ever had. Victor had vanished from my world completely. No texts, no messages, not even a glance when I tried to stop by the bar one last time. He told someone else to tell me he was busy, and I understood without needing to hear the words directly. I had been useful to him only as long as the risk was low, and now I was nothing but a liability. I thought about calling Daniel, rehearsing apologies in my head, but I knew they would mean nothing. I had told myself so many times that my remarks were just jokes, that he was too sensitive, that he would always bend rather than break. Now I understood his quiet had been strength, his patience had been strategy, and the final silence he gave me was not weakness but certainty. He did not shout, did not curse, did not fight me the way I used to claim I wanted him to. He simply built a wall of facts and law around himself and the children and left me outside. Margaret's words echoed too. She had once said Daniel was protecting his children, and now I saw what she meant. He had carved out a life where their routines, their safety, and their trust were intact, free from my chaos. I wanted to hate her for standing by him, but deep down I knew she was right. She had always seen through me, seen the cracks I pretended weren't there, and in the end she had helped him build the case that undid me. I sat in the living room, staring at the empty toy box in the corner, remembering how I used to laugh with friends about being too much for Daniel, about how even his best friend couldn't resist me. Those laughs felt like knives now, sharp reminders that what I thought was power had only been arrogance. The friends who once laughed with me no longer called. They had chosen their side, and it was not mine. To them, I was reckless, careless, the one who ruined her own home with words she couldn't take back. The papers sat on the counter, signed and final, and no amount of denial could change them. I had lost the weekdays, the house, the security of knowing Daniel would always be there to steady things when I pushed too far. All that remained was the quiet, and in that quiet I was left with nothing but my own thoughts. I told myself it wasn't fair, that he had been cold, that he had abandoned me, but the truth pressed down heavier with each hour. He had not abandoned me. I had driven him away. I had mocked the man who once loved me, dismissed his feelings, and gambled with his dignity. And in the end, he reclaimed it without a single word, leaving me sitting in the shell of a home I had destroyed with my own laughter, wondering how I ever believed a joke would leave me untouchable. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching? Are you watching? Are you watching? Are you watching?